So good morning. What we have to do today is a number of things. If you look at the syllabus, on Thursday I don't have a lecture listed that says the article assignment is due. So what we're going to do is I'm going to talk about organizational buying today. I brought, at the end of the class, I brought your exams if you want your Scantron back from the first exam if you were not here. Last week when I handed those back, I will hand those back to you. And then I'm going to give you time to come up. It won't take the entire hour in terms of lecture. I'll give you time to come up and ask questions about your article reviews. A number of you had questions. If you want to talk to me about that, I will be happy to talk to you about those at the end of the hour. So we won't use the entire hour for organizational buying behavior. And then on Thursday, you have that time to either work on your article review. It's due by midnight, so you can turn it in by midnight on Thursday to the Dropbox. There's a Dropbox for E2L. Or I will be here on Thursday. I will open the classroom, and you can come in, and that would be a good time for you to, if you've gotten your article reviews due, to actually work on your group project, which is sort of an expansion of your article review stuff. You pick a topic, you've got to have at least 3 sources, 5 pages, and put together a PowerPoint. I will open a Dropbox for that as well. You'll deposit into the Dropbox both. You'll have one member of your group, your leader, deposit both your paper, which is 5 pages, and then the PowerPoint presentation. There's a rubric in the syllabus, so you want to look at the rubric for both of the article review assignment and the group project to make sure that you're on target. Yes, sir.
When's that group want to do?
The group project is going to be due on starting with March 29th. That's when the group papers are due according to the syllabus. So March 29th, and that's when we'll have the student presentation. So Thursday is a good opportunity for you. Again, I will be here. If you're having problems in your group, if you want me to mediate, that's a good time for me to meet with your group and say things like, if you're not pulling your weight, I'm going to pull you out and put you in another group, or you'll make your own group. So it's a good time for you to have an opportunity. I recognize that students at UCL, for the most part, are working adults. How many of you have jobs? And so I know that you have lives outside of school, and that can make communicating and working together difficult. So I've reserved that time on Thursday for you to either do your article review or to work in groups, and I will be here to help you with that. Again, at the end of class today, I will pass back for those of you that want your Scantrons, those Scantrons, and then I will also pass back or I'll have time to talk about your article reviews if you want to talk to me about that, if you have questions about courses and things like that. So that's where we're going. We need to talk about organizational buying behavior. And one of the things that we do here is we have a professional sales program. And if you want to make a lot of money and you want to get a good job, I would suggest you can seriously consider our professional sales program because we have more jobs than we have sales students. And so it's the only major and minor that we can say on campus that has 100% placement. Nursing can say they have 100% placement of their majors, but they don't have a minor in nursing. And so we have 100% placement of our majors and minors. It's a good opportunity. A lot of what we teach in that class focuses on business-to-business sales, not business-to-consumer. So last time we talked about business-to-consumer sales, and I want to ask you, do you think, I gave you 3 models. There was basically the classical model of rational actor, which is this information search, evaluation of alternatives, purchase decision, post-purchase decision, and then post-purchase evaluation of the decision-making process. And I suggested to you that maybe that wasn't necessarily the way people actually go about buying things, that there's this antithetical theory that says people don't really behave all that rationally. And as a result of things like, and we'll talk more about this when we get to retailing, we understand as marketers that there are cues that we can give consumers to influence their buying decision making. And so there's a subfield of marketing. There's a guy named Paco Underhill who's done a lot of work in this area called retail anthropology. Yeah, can you imagine anything more boring than retail anthropology? So it's the study of consumers in their natural habitat and retail environments and looking at what they do. And so if you think about what you do when you go to the grocery store, what is it that you do when you go to the grocery store? How many of you go to the grocery store when you're hungry? Come on, a lot of more of you need to admit that you do this. How many of you absolutely will not go to the grocery store when you're hungry? You make a list, and you stick to your list. Okay, maybe you're rational actors, because why do you do that? Why do you not go to the grocery store when you're hungry? You buy way more than you need to because you're starving to death, and you don't have a list, you get off work, and you go right to the grocery store, and what do? Well, they have planned out grocery stores in such a way as to maximize the amount of stuff that you're buying. Die for Less is one of the best examples. They've taken it to an all-new height. How many of you have been to the Die for Less, either on Northwest Buy for Less? I call it Die for Less because they dye their meat, and you might, I know, get food poisoning from some of the stuff that they sell. So if you go to the one on Northwest Expressway, it's actually a little bit nicer than the one on 23rd and Penn in Oklahoma City. But how many of you have gone to a Buy for Less? What do they do in the Buy for Less? They've taken this idea of retail anthropology to a high art form. When you go into the Buy for Less, what do? They instantly have you go to the right and walk past, and you cannot get out of that section. You go to the right and you walk past all of the fruits and vegetables, which are perishable items that they want to sell first. And remind you, maybe that's a good thing because it provides a cue to you that you need to have fresh fruits and vegetables as part of your diet. That they force you to walk past all of that stuff, and then you can't just go down the aisles in the Buy for Less. What do? Well, in that section they have it basically walled with display cases, refrigeration units, and vegetables all the way to the back. So they force you to go all the way to the back of the store, which is where the staple products are, and then you can then go to the rest of the store and through the other aisles. And so why do they do that? Well, they want to sell the fruits and vegetables that perished first, fastest, and they want to remind you to do that. But they also put those staples at the back of the store because they want you to have to do what? Walk past everything else, either getting into the store or going out to the registers of all those processed foods which have a high markup value. And then we have end caps on the end of the aisles that are designed to tempt you. And if you go, we know studies show that if you go when you're hungry, you buy more. If you go with children, so what you should never do is you should never take your kids. How many of you have children? A few of you? None of you have children? No one in here has kids? 1, 2 people have kids? If you go with your kids, you're going to buy even more. Why? Because they're hungry and they ask for stuff, and so when you get up to the aisle, when you get up to the checkout, there are all of those impulse purchases for you to buy. Things like what? Candy bars, pop, gum, things that are impulse buys, and so you don't really think about it, and before you know it, you bought a lot more than you might have otherwise. Well, is that model, this idea of the irrational actor or the non-rational actor, is that model applicable to business? Well, a lot of scholars would say that actually when it comes to business, this model of decision making is more accurate with regard to business-to-business sales than it is with regard to business-to-consumer sales. And why is that? It's because of a major characteristic of business-to-business decision making or institutional buying. And when we talk about business-to-business, we're also including in there governmental entities and nonprofits. But in those entities as well, even in those entities that are not-for-profit or are governmental institutions, the demand for products and services that they buy is what we call derived. What does that mean? What does it mean that it's derived demand? Your text talks about this concept in page 141. What is derived demand? If you're buying as a consumer, you're buying for who? You're buying for yourself. You're buying for your own consumption, for your own needs, and that can be influenced by a whole lot of things. Why is it that everybody in Edmond drives an urban assault vehicle? A Cadillac Escalade or something like that. Why do you think that, does anybody need a Cadillac Escalade? Or a Lincoln Navigator? Why do they buy it? It's a status symbol. right? They buy it because it's got some status, their friends have it, they think they need it. It's amazing to me that people in Edmond, I love when it's a snow day because they think because they can go, because it's got four-wheel drive, that they can also stop. It doesn't work that way. The fact that you can go doesn't mean you can necessarily stop, but you're buying it for your own purpose and your own maybe psychological needs and things like that. Is that why businesses buy? For their own psychological needs? They buy for others' needs, and so the demand is derived. You're not buying stuff because you want it, because you're like Gollum in Lord of the Flies, my precious, right? That's consumer behavior. You're buying because you have to satisfy the needs and wants of your constituents or customer base. And so the demand is derived, which means that it's probably a more rational process. You're not necessarily buying for yourself or your own interests, that you're buying for the needs of consumers and clients and constituents that you have. Now, having said that, there is an argument that can be made that maybe businesses also engage in irrational purchasing behavior, because what percentage, and this was a test question in your first test, of businesses fail within the first 5 years? Yeah, over 50% of businesses fail within the first 5 years, meaning that they didn't do enough marketing research to figure out whether or not there really was enough demand for the products or services that they wanted to provide. The fact that you think that Kewpie dolls are a wonderful thing and you're totally fascinated by them, and Beanie Babies or anything else, doesn't necessarily mean that the rest of the populace is going to agree with you. And that's something that we call in logic and critical thinking an attribution error. You project. Psychologists call this projection, where you project your feelings, your wants, and desires onto others. And so maybe there is an argument that it can be less than rational, even in the business-to-business context. But for the most part, because of this characteristic of derived demand, it is more rational. They're buying for the needs and wants of others. And so you plan, you buy things. One of the things that we have you take, if you get the sales major or minor, is we have you take the purchasing and materials management. One of the reasons that we have you take that class is because it's really understanding the other side of that transaction, of the sales transaction, and that's important. When I went to get my PhD, I went down to OU and talked to them, and they said, well, we'll admit you, but you'd better be interested in purchasing materials and logistics, because that's the kind of school we are. And I thought, yuck, I can't think of anything more boring than looking at purchasing and logistics studies. And so I went somewhere else to get my PhD, because that was the focus of their program. It's sort of natural that that would be the focus of their program, because right here in the center of the nation, we have a lot of what? We have a whole lot of transportation that goes on. We have 3 major interstates that run through the Oklahoma City metro area, and so you can gather a lot of data, things like I-40, I-35, and I-44, which run right smack dab and all merge in the center of Oklahoma City. So in this buying for businesses and organizations, you should know what the different types of markets are. Why would you want to sell to these markets? Well, because there's a lot of money to be made in these markets. So there are industrial markets, and these are manufacturers of products or services. There are about 7.7 million of them. There are also nonprofit, NGOs, non-governmental organizations that you should consider, and there are lots of those, things like Red Cross that involve purchase-making decisions. What kind of things does Red Cross supply? Disaster supplies, relief, things like that, water. Reselling markets, there are 1.5 million retailers, 435,000 wholesalers in the United States, and 89,500 governmental units. That's things like federal organizations, the Department of State, the Department of Education, the Department of Labor, the Department of Defense, then state-level organizations. We have 50 states in this country, and then thousands of local governmental units, everything from cities, counties, municipalities, to rural water districts, and special entity districts that function, that all need to buy things. The North American, and you should know this for the exam, the North American, which is talked about on your text on page 139, the North American Industrial Classification System, NAICS, provides a way of categorizing. And so there are a number of codes. And you should know what the 6-digit coding system is used for. The first 2 digits designate a sector of the economy. So there was a question on the first exam about sectors, things like the financial sector, the manufacturing sector. The 3rd digit designates a subsector, and the 4th digit represents an industry group. And there are questions that ask you which digit designates, for example, the industry, the sector, the subsector, the industry group. The 5th digit is for the industry. And then the 6th is for specific. So as you go down in the classification system, the digits represent ever-increasing specificity. What this does is it provides a way of measuring classification and economic activity in our economy. And it's very useful for those people that want to sell in industrial markets. There are a number of differences between consumer behavior and organizational buying behavior that you should be aware of. First of all, the number of potential buyers is a lot smaller. So there are how many people in the United States? If you add up the total number of governmental agencies, nonprofits, business agencies, retailers, wholesalers, manufacturers, it's a lot less. How many people are there in the United States? What? Over 350 million people in the United States. So why would you want to sell, when you add up all those numbers, it's considerably less, it's only in the millions, as opposed to 350 million. Why would you want to sell to organizations?
They have a lot larger buying power.
They have a lot larger buying power. If you can get in with an organization, your ability to sell large volumes is a lot greater. So the size of the decision making is enormously large usually. Technical specifications become extremely important in the business to business and business to government or business to nonprofit sector. They're going to rely much more on higher level skill and expertise. And one of the things that we talk about in our professional sales program is understanding really this business to business context, understanding how it is that you sell differently to industrial markets and business markets as opposed to consumer markets. Consumer markets, are you really worried about the specifications necessarily of the products that you buy? How many of you actually really think about, for example, when you go and buy sheets, how are sheets graded? By thread count, how many of you actually look at that? A few of you actually look at the thread count. You are well-informed consumers. How many of you buy it because it's pretty patterned? Or it goes with your decor? Things like that. In business-to-business buying, we're going to be far more interested in the technical specifications, which means that you're going to have a lot more team selling involved. Oftentimes, for business-to-business and industrial markets, you're going to have this approach of a team where you'll have experts. So the company that I work for manufactured learning management systems for the K-12 industry. What kinds of specifications are you going to be looking for in terms of learning management? So you all know what a learning management system is. We bought a new one not too long ago here at UCL. Before we had D2L, we had something called WebCT. And WebCT was bought by Blackboard. And Blackboard does this. They are the standard oil of the learning management systems in higher education. And what they do is they go in and buy out other LMS products and then they shut them down. They did this, first of all, with a product called Angel. There was this really great, very easy to use, learner-friendly learning management system called Angel out there, which was a very powerful tool. And Blackboard came in, bought up Angel, and then they said, we're no longer going to support it. What does that mean to companies that have, or schools that have bought Angel? Yeah, it means that they're effectively, you can keep it, but what happens to operating systems over time? Yeah, you upgrade the operating system. How many of you have upgraded to Windows 10 for free? They've launched another crappy product and foisted it off on an unsuspecting consumer population. So you upgrade your management or your operating system, and you're going to have problems with regard to patches that will fix the problem. So they put Angel out of business. They basically forced companies or schools that were using Angel to either buy Blackboard or go out and find another one. The same thing with WebCT. They also bought Moodle Rooms, which is a learning management system. Now, what kinds of things are going to be important when we talk about school districts and the learning management system? Well, it's going to have to operate across a variety of OS platforms. So that's going to be one of the things that school districts are going to look at, this highly technical specified stuff. What is a platform? And our salespeople, they have some basic idea of the company I work for of what a platform was, but with regard to really technical specifications and how you're going to integrate that into the platform, that becomes more problematic. And so when we would send a team out to talk to school districts, we would oftentimes send the head of our programming department out as well. Because what are the basic operating systems that are out there that you're going to have to worry about? Windows, iOS. Now there are becoming, because of these smartphones, there are what kinds of OSs on your Android tablets? What's that OS? Droid. Google has now got their own OS, don't they? For the Google phone, don't they have a Google phone out with an OS? So,
Google owns Android.
Google owns Droid.
Yeah, Microsoft has their Windows.
Okay, so there's Microsoft Windows, there's iOS, there's Droid. There's also a lot of school districts and prisons that operated with something called Linux, and so we would have to engage in understanding Linux. Linux was actually maybe a better operating system than Microsoft. What happened to Linux? Why didn't it take off? Anybody know? Anybody remember using a Linux program?
It wasn't very user-friendly.
It was very user-friendly compared to Windows. It was actually much better. The problem was that it was open source and nobody knew who owned the code. And so it was hard to program for. And that was the reason that Linux didn't take off. It was actually better than when Microsoft got started. They launched their first product they actually bought. They didn't develop it themselves. And it was called QDOS. Did I tell you all this? What does QDOS stand for? It stood for Quick and Dirty Operating System. And they bought it to give it to sell it to a government contract, and then they modified it and they dropped it just down to DOS. Linux was actually a better program, but nobody knew who owned it. It wasn't proprietary, and so it was harder to get programs written for it. But we had some prisons that we sold to that were still using Linux-based systems because they didn't allow, one of the things that they didn't have was access to the internet. Why would you not have access to the internet in a prison? What? Because they could engage in criminal activity if they had access to the outside world. And so there were some prisons that still had these Linux-based systems that we had to integrate, which also meant that the delivery method was something that we would have to negotiate with because they didn't necessarily have the capability. And so we would still have to ship product out in terms of CD-ROMs that they would use to install the program on their LANs or WANs, their local area networks or their wide area networks, because they couldn't download it from a computer. Whereas other school districts that were wealthier and other institutions that used our product were also going to use probably internet download because that's a much easier way to deliver software and much more efficient than actually going out and installing it. But prisons and mental institutions and things like that, we actually had to produce these disks. And so understanding how those install was important, and we would send people out in teams to teach and to talk about the selling of that product and what we could do for those kinds of institutions that had those older type systems that were still using Linux-based. So technical specifications become important. Things like whether or not we were aligned with all 50 state standards became important in understanding that. So we would have to have an educational specialist who could go in and reassure school districts as part of the sales team that what we could provide was a product that would be compatible with and approved by their state curriculum committee of their boards of education. And so that kind of technical specification becomes critical in those kinds of markets. Understanding that. The size of the order is larger. The buying time generally is greater in business-to-business relations and business-to-government in particular. Why is the buying time and the buying cycle a lot longer in these? So if you are hungry today and you're driving home from school after class, you can stop by the grocery store, and if you have money in your bank account, you can go buy all of the stuff that you need to make dinner. Can we just do that here at UCO, for example? No. How do we buy stuff? We do it by purchase order. So when we decided we needed a new learning management system because WebCT had been bought, we had to do what's called a request for proposal. So we have buying centers in a lot of these institutions that are highly complex and formalized, and they are here at UCO. The purchasing department falls under the Vice President for Administration. Technically, any purchase over $500 has to be approved through and go through the request for proposal. And understanding these buying centers and who is it that actually has authority to buy and who is an influencer. So there are people who influence the buying decision. Professors, for example, sat on the committee that selected the D2L learning management system, but who actually has the ability to sign or engage in contracts and write checks for the university? Can I do it? Can I buy stuff for the university? I'm an agent. I'm a user of the product, which is the learning management system. We also had students on the committee because you all are also users of the product, which is the interface on the LMS. But who actually has the ability to buy? And figuring these things out becomes difficult in business to business, business to government, business to non-profit. Who actually has the ability to buy stuff at UCL, would you suppose? The Vice President of Administration is one of two people that has purchasing authority. The Vice President for Administration has that authority, and who else? The President of the institution. So there are only two people that can approve purchases of large dollar amounts on this campus. And understanding that kind of context is absolutely critical because you're going to have to get their approval. The second in command is not the Vice President for Administration. When the President leaves campus, who becomes the acting president of our institution? The provost becomes the acting president. So the second in command, understanding the structure in this buying center becomes important because not even the second in command here at UCO, the guy who takes the place of the president whenever the president is off campus, actually has buying and purchasing authority. Only the president and the vice president for administration. So it begins with a request for proposal. We put it out there, and then what has to happen? Well, we have to, by state statute, specify a number of days that the bidding process is open. And then vendors from various organizations will submit bids to our buying center, which will be sealed, and then they'll all be opened at one point in time, and the bid award will be given to the lowest and best bidder. So I did a study. We did a thing several years ago here at UCO. When I first started, we engaged in what was called strategic planning. And they had us list goals. So the buying process here at UCO actually starts with things like our strategic plan. So you can go to our website and we list our strategic plan out there for you to look at. What is it that we're achieving, or where are we headed? What are the kinds of things that we're doing as an institution? One of the things that we want to do is we want to have a footprint beyond this campus. So we've got what now? Beyond this campus. We've got the Academy of Contemporary Music, which is downtown in Bricktown, and we also have what? We also have the Carnegie Center downtown now, where we offer classes for people who are downtown at a satellite location. So we begin with the strategic plan, and the planning process that we went through when I first started here at UCO was a several-month-long process, and every department did it, and we identified what were called high-cost goals, mid-range goals, and low-cost and no-cost goals. And one of the things that I was kind of interested in was, is there any such thing as a no-cost goal for a governmental organization? There isn't. Everything costs money. Even the simplest thing, like changing a light bulb, costs money. Can I just unscrew the light bulb and change the light bulb in here? I did this study to prove that we didn't have any such thing as low-cost or no-cost goals. So I tracked down what it costs to actually change a light bulb in a classroom here at UCO. Well, it begins with buying light bulbs. So we have to have a purchase order. There's a purchasing agent which will write that purchase order for the year for supplies like light bulbs. That will go out to bid. That process costs several $1,000s because these purchasing agents generally have a degree in purchasing and materials management. And they understand the state rules that are involved in purchasing. Things like not anyone can sign for the purchase order. It has to be the president or the vice president that have the ability to contract. So it begins with a purchase order. We then buy these light bulbs in bulk. If I want to get the light bulb changed in my classroom because these start to go out, I have to fill out a work order request. That goes to the building captain who has to input it into a system. At the time it was a paper system, so I would fill out a request. I would give it to the building captain, who was one of our administrative assistants. They would then put it in campus mail. That meant that a campus mail delivery person had to come and get it. That takes time. Sort it, take it over to the physical plant, have it given to a work order clerk who would then enter it, and ultimately then somebody would come out and change the light bulb. What do you think it cost to change a light bulb here at the university? This was years and years ago before we put that into a computerized system. It's gotten somewhat cheaper, I would imagine. What do you think the cost was to change one light bulb? It was over $150 to change one light bulb. So there's nothing that government does that doesn't cost money. And understanding this process becomes really, really important. So in these buying centers where you have highly formalized structures and decision making, you have more than one person that's making the decision. Understanding who is the actual decision maker, how the process works becomes critical. So they're highly formalized structures. There are more people involved. The buying time thus increases. So we begin with a fiscal year. Most organizations have a budgetary year, and they budget and allocate among their resources for their goals and priorities for the next year. And so understanding where they are in that fiscal year or that fiscal process is also important to the sales cycle. So there are more people involved. The decision is more complex. The buying center plays a huge role. There are oftentimes technicals. And you should know the difference. On page 146, your text talks about the difference between users, influencers, buyers, deciders, and gatekeepers to the process. So who's a gatekeeper in a lot of businesses and organizations that you need to influence and maybe need to sell to if you're going to get the business's money? Who are the gatekeepers? Is the CEO the gatekeeper? How about the CEO's secretary? Because the CEO's secretary, if you're trying to sell a large item to a company and you need the CEO to sign for that item, who's going to control whether or not you get in to see that individual? The secretary. They have enormous amounts of power. And so understanding that is critical in understanding the buying decision-making process for organizations. Post-purchase behaviors, a lot of times what we see is there are long-term contracts. And so going back to this idea of environmental scanning, you have to understand relationships that emerge in various industries and trade. And one of the things that impacts this is something called the Uniform Commercial Code. The UCC deals with the sale of goods and the lease of goods in Article 2 and Article 2A of the UCC. And so one of the things that this has impacted in this buying decision-making process is it has modified the way we go about engaging in contractual relations. Historically, under the common law of contracts, you had to have this formula where you could identify the moment that you had the meeting of the minds of the parties involved in the contract. So generally speaking, the contract took the form of a promise given in exchange for something of legal value that was bargained for, and that's the doctrine of what we call consideration. Generally, it took the form of a promise given in exchange for another promise. Promise 1 given in exchange for promise 2. Bargain for exchange, and there's legal value on both sides of the contract. You had to be able to ascertain the exact moment that the contract was made, the exact moment when you had the meeting of the minds. Because in the industrial world and in the business-to-business sector, it's not always able to ascertain the exact moment. The UCC modifies this idea of the common law, and you no longer necessarily have to have an exact moment when you could say there was a specified moment in the meeting of the minds between the organizations for the sale of goods. What this does is it means that what you start out with generally is when an organization wants to buy something, they submit a purchase order to the company that they want to buy it from over a course of dealing. So generally speaking, your post-decision making and consumer behavior may involve, I'm never going to buy that product again. That rarely happens in the business-to-business context where you have long-term relationships that are established. So for example, restaurants, they generally buy their food from what? They usually buy their food from one of two suppliers in the Oklahoma City. There's US Foods, Benny Keith, and there's one other wholesaler of foods. These are long-term relationships that they have over a course of dealing with the restaurant and the supplier, US Foods, Benny Keith. It used to be William E. Davis was one of the ones, but you would set up a contractual relationship with them, and that would continue over time. You send your purchase order to US Foods. US Foods then provides the goods and services to the restaurants, and they will then send an invoice. There may be differences in the terms between the purchase order, which is generally drafted by the purchasing company's legal counsel, and the invoice, which may contain additional or contrary terms to the purchase order. So the purchase order may state things like, and one of the things that becomes interesting is the financing arrangements of these kinds of deals. Generally speaking, when the restaurant buys food, they buy it on credit. They don't give the driver of the truck a check when he comes and delivers the food. And so they may say something like net 60 days on their purchase order, and the invoice will come back and will say what? What's the standard term of credit in the business-to-business world? For those of you who are accountants, you should know this. Net 30. And so which will control? And the answer is that it's so long as it doesn't change the substantive terms, and that's not considered a substantive term, the last document. So you have what's called the battle of the forms that gets involved in these business-to-business relationships over a long time course of dealing that you have to think about. So these post-purchase decision-making are generally involved in long-term courses of action. When they have to buy new stuff, then you go through a higher level of scrutiny in the buying decision-making process in the purchasing center. One of the things that's become popular are auctions, online auctions in the organizational markets, and you should know what those are. And also, your text talks about reverse auctions, and you should know what those terms are for an exam. Are there any questions about organizational behavior in buying? It's a critical part of the economy and something that you should understand. For those of you that are going into sales, you learn a lot more about it in our sales and our advanced sales class, and we also require that you take that purchasing class, and so I think those are good classes. It's not the area that I specialize in, so it's not the one that I have the most knowledge about. Do you have any questions? All right, so what we're going to do is, if you have, did not pick up your exam last time, I have those. If you want to talk to me about the article review, I'll be here. And then on Thursday, I'll come in, I'll open the class, and you can either work in your groups or you can use that time to work in your article review. It's due by midnight to the Dropbox on D2L on Thursday. So if you have questions, come down. I'll be happy to talk with you.